So I want to discuss a number of polls with you. The first is there's a lot of talk about the president losing support over the war in Iran. But I was looking at the exit polls from 2024 and came up with this really interesting one, which found that of the 5 issues that mattered the most to Americans and how they voted for president, just 4% chose foreign policy as the deciding issue in terms of who they voted for, whether it was Kamala Harris or Donald Trump. And of course, the majority of those who chose foreign policy were Republicans. I'm wondering if you think that the war in Iran is going to have any impact on the midterms.
Well, I think it will have an impact in terms of how it ultimately impacts the economy, which is the #1 issue. So right now, I do think that we're seeing, any erosion of the president's numbers right now, I think can be traced back specifically to the situation with gas prices that was kicked off by the war, the closure of the Strait of Hormuz, and those are issues that I think they're very cognizant about getting resolved pretty quickly.
Let me ask you, like, how soon before the midterms? Right. What would you say is the deadline for gas prices coming back under $3 a gallon for them to still make it out okay in the midterms?
Well, look, I think, we had a similar situation 4 years ago with Russia and Ukraine, and when Biden put a whole bunch of sanctions on Russian oil, and that really drove up gas prices to far, far higher than they were now. But they came down by the summer, right? I mean, so they eventually came down. People kind of calmed down and realized, we have ways around this. President Trump has secured Venezuelan oil, right? So there are lots of different levers I think this administration can push specifically. But I do think that what you're going to see by the summer, things are going to set in, and you're going to, then we're going to head directly into the midterm campaign period. And so there'll be relatively little room, I think, for these macro forces to, people's perceptions to change about those between, let's say, midsummer and November.
Now, the Democrats are feeling pretty sanguine about the situation. They've had a lot of successes in special elections. The president's approval is historically low. We have that currently only 62% disapprove of him, only 36% approve of the president. On the other hand, you do have polls like this survey, this 20-year survey from YouGov, let's pull that up, which had the change in partisan composition of major demographic groups in the United States, and they're all moving to the right, except for white men with college degrees. So on the one hand, you have the president polling poorly. On the other hand, you also have the Democrats polling very poorly. The Democrats are on the ballot. The president's not on the ballot, although, of course, he would say that he is. He's endorsing a lot of candidates and so forth. What is your analysis of where things stand currently looking at the midterms?
Sure. Look, I think that we've seen a lot of numbers showing Democrats at record low levels of popularity over the last several months, and really dating back to the 2024 election. But here's why I don't think that hurts them in quite the way people think. It's because a lot of the people who are now saying that they don't like the Democrats are hardcore partisan Democrats who don't think that the party is fighting hard enough. These are people who think Schumer is too weak. And this is why we have had these pointless shutdowns. This is why we have the lines at the airports, is because it's Democratic leaders who are desperately trying to prove to Democratic voters that they're tough, that they're strutting and preening around, and ultimately can't really actually do anything. And so we see them back, then they eventually back down. But this is really all about Chuck Schumer keeping his job more than it is about this. But ultimately, those voters are, hardcore, extreme, partisan Democrats who are not voting Republican. And so that's why I think some of those numbers are a little bit misleading.
That's so fascinating. There's also this sort of a kind of governing penalty, I think somebody called it recently, to where, people who get unhappy about the way things are, they're always going to blame whoever's in power. Historically, the president's party always loses support in the midterms. So Mike Johnson seems to think that, things are going to be okay. Is he completely wrong?
Well, look, this always is a choice or it's a referendum. And I think Trump and MAGA are going to have to make this election more of a choice. The Democrats are going to try to make it a referendum on the incumbent party, which is the formula for big gains in midterms. But we've seen when parties have been able to defy history.
Thank you for watching. Subscribe below and download our NewsNation app right now on your phone, and you will get fact-based, unbiased news for all Americans.